Chapter 99 to 100. Hime felt the loving squeeze and pressed herself even more into her lover, affectionately sticking her tongue into his mouth, deepening the kiss. She knew he needed this and took it as her duty as Kiri Kunoichi to help her Lord Third. The Mizukage moaned into the soft lips that were tenderly pressing onto his mouth, and couldn't help but even more softly squeeze the hips of the wonderful being who was straddling him. In his incredibly busy and stress-filled schedule, these moments of bliss and pleasure were the only thing keeping him sane. He could feel her breasts on his chest, making his head going blank as he became more and more lustful. His hand suddenly slowly dragged itself along Himeno's back, tenderly caressing it until his thumb finally reached the hem of her pants. Slowly, very carefully, he started pulling it lower and lower. Knock, knock. Both lovers froze in their tracks and Mizukage let out an incredibly annoyed sigh as he buried his head into Himeno's chest. WYNW. His muffled voice resounded from her chest, and Hime giggled as him speaking into her breasts tickled her. Well, time to do your duties as the Mizukage. She smiled, inwardly delighted at how annoyed he became for not getting any. She was well aware he even removed every important thing from his desk beforehand. It was obvious what kind of play he wanted to do with her today. Well, tough luck. She tried to pull away, but he was still tightly embracing her waist, not letting go. Maybe they will leave if we don't answer? The Mizukage asked while raising his head and giving Hime a puppy-eyed look. Ah, that's so cute of you. She sighed as her hand softly caressed his hair. It was only when he thought she accepted his plan did she continue in a deadpan tone. Being so naive. I am your Jonin commander and that means no slacking. She used her chakra to sting his arms, which finally freed her. After she stood up and pulled her pants back up before also clothing the upper part of her body, she went towards the door to check what this was about. The Mizukage had a break right now, so it must be important for them to interrupt it. Knock, knock. The Mizukage's head fell onto the table with an audible thump as he groaned in annoyance. Fuck, being cock-blocked might be even worse than having to deal with Rei. He thought fervently, but a sudden spike of Himeno's killing intent made him straighten himself and notice her glare. Tidy yourself up. She plainly spoke in an ordering tone that made him gulp but comply. Sadly, most of his time awake was spent deep in planning and giving out orders, so he was pretty freaking stressed. Worse yet, Himeno's body was the only outlet he had, and the minx clearly knew she was the only thing keeping him sane. For now, he was utterly whipped. It took Hime a few moments, but when she re-entered the room, she was carrying a scroll. It's a report from Rei. She hummed, and Mizukage couldn't help but feel sour at that. If there is one thing that's worse than dealing with Rei or being cockblocked, it must be being cockblocked by Rei. He dryly thought as he accepted the scroll with a visible eye twitch and unrolled it. His eyes looked through the report, reading it once, twice, thrice as his jaw was getting progressively lower with each read-through. He was blinking in astonishment at what he was reading, and when he was done reading it for the 6th time, the scroll fell from his hands onto the table. So, how screwed are we? Hime asked in amusement, predicting something like this would happen. They won, the Mizukage stated in an emotionless and even tone. Oh, isn't that great? Hime quipped sarcastically, fully aware of what this meant. Yet, her voice held the barest hint of amusement. They fucked up months of extensive planning, the Mizukage stated. He was now on the verge of crying and mental breakdown as months of his hard work just went down the drain. Hime just scoffed at that. I told you to not send them as reinforcements. You didn't listen. She spelled it out for him while poking his shoulder with her index finger as her expression was twisted in exasperation. The Mizukage lifelessly turned his face to look at her with his shoulders sagged. I have given them clear orders dash. He started only to be interrupted. You mean these? Hime raised her eyebrow as she drew out a scroll from the stack of scrolls next to the desk. When the Mizukage saw it, he could only gape at what were his written orders to Rei and Konan. The only copy. Hime huffed and crossed her hands under her chest as she continued. You told them they are reinforcements and then got into one of yours playful arguments with Rei. In the end, the scroll with the secret orders was never given to them. Heck, you can't even blame this one on them not listening to you. This was your idiocy all along. Hime knew this moment was coming the second she noticed that scroll in the morning a few days ago when she was tidying the office up. She didn't want to make a scene at that time, but this was important as the Mizukage was clearly slipping whenever Rei was involved. She decided to be a bit heavy-handed when the fallout from this mishap came. She could always hope it would make the Mizukage more focused. Fuck, was the only response Mizukage could give. The orders for Rei clearly stated he was not to win. His mission was to save Ringo's life and Ringo's life alone. The people in the Kiri force who were sent to Nagori Isles were all undesirable from a political viewpoint or were in some way related to traitors. It was simply a legal purge, while it would also be a good way to diminish Ringo's reputation. Ringo was a good tool for the village. excellent assassin and tracker. But the Mizukage would rather be damned than let her have some political influence. She completed every S-rank assassination while being sick and on her deathbed. Now that she was healthy again, her accomplishments would just pile up and her pace was frankly frightening. He already had a candidate for the Mizukage hat, but Ringo was a very good runner-up in the eyes of the clans. That had to be prevented. Himino sat down in the guest seat opposite the Mizukage as she took the scroll into her hands and quickly swept the contents with her gaze. As she was about to finish, she could suddenly hear the pondering voice of her lover. How did the scroll arrive? An understanding flash appeared in her eyes for a bit before vanishing, leaving only a sad pity. It wouldn't work. A copy was sent to the council. This can't be swept under the rug, Himino said while sighing as she heard the Mizukage cursing. You gotta admit though, this was masterfully done, she hummed. The Council of Clan Heads will now most likely push for opening a Kumo front since we have a good and well-hidden outpost in a location incredibly close to the shores of the Land of Lightning that could be easily and discreetly accessed by our ships. Not to say about the morale boost due to the victory and how big of an achievement it was. In the letter, Ray described that they discovered one of the smallest islands of Nagori Isles was actually an underwater mountain that had only the peak peeking out, so they used it to create an underground hideout. It was really well-positioned, well-hidden, and too good of an opportunity for an invasion towards the Land of Lightning to pass up. Yes, the Mizukage drawled, pulling out his pipe from the drawer. Himino frowned but didn't stop him from starting to smoke. This time she could bear with it. This win will shift the entire war. The Mizukage exhaled a puff of smoke as he comfortably leaned into his chair as he continued in a fed-up voice. Every plan for the invasion of the Land of Fire can be scrapped because of this. It's worse, actually. I was referring to how it would affect the village politics when I said, masterfully. Himino started with a hint of respect. The letter is written in a way that gives most achievements to Ringo. It was written as if it was her leadership that won 200 versus 700 with only 2 casualties, getting injured in the process. We both know better, as I would bet it was Ray who dealt with both A and Killer B while Conan finished off the enemy army, but the report says nothing about that. It's vague enough with a good amount of facts that it can be misunderstood as Ringo's achievement. This will give a lot of ammunition to the people who want her as the Mizukage due to her excellent skill as an assassin. Kirigakure was the village of assassins first and foremost, so it was natural the clans wanted someone skilled in the art as the leader. Ringo fit the bill for them, but the third Mizukage had a different opinion. The letter, however, really screwed up his plans both internally and externally. The Mizukage wanted someone with greater firepower though, and Ringo was not on the list of his candidates. As the realization in just how much more than he predicted would this report affect, Himino continued speaking with an unbothered tone. We can't forsake the 200 ninjas who were sent to Nagori Isles to be purged either. It would create unrest among our shinobi populace since the event of this victory is too good to not be spread among our ninjas in order to boost morale. We really can't afford to have our ninja question if they are going to be sent on a suicide mission next. In small and unnoticeable doses it is fine, but right now, we will have to actually open the Kumo front or prepare for discontent. During the war, that could prove fatal. Himino shook her head in exasperation at just how many angles the report covered. She highly doubted Ray did that deliberately. This mission would be seen as the greatest victory of Kirigakure, but for the Mizukage, this was the greatest defeat in his career yet. The problems this would cause for him were almost mind-boggling. Ah, fuck it. The Mizukage ruffled his hair. I still have 30 minutes of break. We can talk about how screwed up we are later, he grumbled. Himino could only sadly smile as she stood up and made her kimono fall onto the ground near her ankles. She didn't plan on doing this since they were interrupted, but her lover now needed some serious cheering up. Tsunade entered the council room with a barely restrained grin on her face. The previous nights, she spent with Ray and Conan having a very heated debate in the sheets, so she was very aware of what this impromptu meeting was about. She was observing mostly confused looks on the faces of the other clan heads, who had no idea what exactly happened in the past several days, nor that this meeting will decide the direction Konoha will take in the war. Tsunade sat on her chair and supported her chin with her hand, waiting for the meeting to start. Order! The third Hokage exclaimed after 5 minutes, and the door into the council room was closed. I am sure many of you are wondering why we are meeting this fine day. Hiruzen started on the lighter note. I'd like to recount some of our war efforts and then discuss albeit minor skirmish. A skirmish that will shift the entire war nevertheless. He calmly said with an authoritative voice despite inwardly cursing whatever brat was the cause of that event. Because of that, his paperwork tripled and he had to completely write off many plans. Months of his work were utterly destroyed, and he couldn't help but do what was the recurrent theme for every Kage these days. Seeth, the second I get that little shit into my hands. Troublesome. Shikami Nara, the Jonin commander, muttered but nevertheless stood up as this was his job. In that case, I will start with the recent happenings in our war efforts. Our ally Suna is suffering from intense large-scale battles on their borders. Both countries of Wind and Rock are trying to get some of their ninjas in so they could either run sabotage, reconnaissance, or assassination of wealthy nobles. Fortunately, there was no request for help so far, therefore we don't need to be concerned about them for now. That's everything about Suna's front. Everyone in the room knew why this was mentioned first. Suna front was something Konoha had no hand in influencing. Not in the light anyway, but it was important as heck. The second Suna falls would be the second this two-front war would become three-front for Konoha, which they wanted to avoid at all cost. It was obvious Iwagakure was stronger, better equipped, and Tsunade would dare to say better trained. Suna was winning due to their environmental advantage. It was as simple as that. They didn't have many people for offense but excelled in defense in the desert. The next would be IWA. Shikami sighed as he took a paper from the table and his eyebrows scrunched. As troublesome as this is, we are in a deadlock. Amigakure completely refused to let the war engulf the Land of Rain because of the event of recent years where the village was attacked and almost flattened by. Shikami stopped for a second and sheepishly scratched the back of his head. Meteorite? As unbelievable as this is, it's what our spies told us. Do we know who attacked them? Tsunade interrupted, leaning into her palms as her elbows put more pressure on the table while curiosity was sparking in her eyes. Shikami briefly looked at her but then shook his head as if in annoyance. Nope, no clue. Only Hanzo saw them and he supposedly suspects they were using some disguising transformation anyway. Something about their features shimmering from time to time. They didn't yet have proper control of my transformation jutsu at the time. And here I hoped there would be some funny theories about the attack, and maybe someone would be framed. How sad. Tsunade thought with amusement while nodding in satisfaction at Shikami. Anyway, Shikami continued, there are some skirmishes on the territory of the Land of Rain, but our and Iwa's troops are continuously attacked by Amigakure forces, and some new organization of ninja calling themselves Akatsuki that wants to keep the Land of Rain peaceful. He shrugged. In short, the biggest battlefield between IWA and Konoha is the grass country. It's a mess since neither can push with enough force to get past the deadlock, and I, as the chief strategist of Konoha, unfortunately, don't see any way to get out of it in the foreseeable future. Shikami finished and the mood turned somber. Every clan head was aware of the high death toll of the battlefield in the grass country. IWA and Konoha had their own bases and the land of grass was engulfed in ferocious guerrilla warfare between them. While major cities didn't really suffer, the countryside was in tatters. As for Kumo Shikami started. That's all Shikami. Hokage interrupted and gestured for his Jonin commander to sit. As for the Kumo front, that's no longer relevant. The third said with an irritated sigh that made many clan heads straighten up. They quickly deduced this was the reason why this meeting was called. After a moment of sullen lamenting, the Hokage continued. According to our intel, Kumo lost a skirmish with Kiri for Nagori Isles. Leaders A and Killer B led around 700 men to confront 200 Kiri shinobi and lost. Many clan heads gasped at that, understanding what they were just told, while Shikami looked as if he wanted to bang his head on the table, with the large black circles under his eyes and all. Tsunade narrowed her eyes at this statement. 200 Kiri nin. Well, that information was broadcasted to Konoha most likely at the Mizukage's order. But for Hokage to know that Kumo sent 700? That was a testament to how good Konoha's intelligence department was. Or was it? Danzo. She pursed her lips. There was simply no other person capable of getting to this information. That means, Hiruzen continued to explain it, for those who didn't yet pick up the meaning of this information. Kumo is retreating from their offensive and as of now, the Kumo front ceased to exist. Kumo needed to consolidate their position, so their ninjas stopped attacking Konoha's borders, which would give Konoha more breathing room. Kumo had to prepare for a war with Kiri since Kiri forces gained a foothold so close to their borders. It had to be said the war between Kumo and Konoha was rarely fought on the borders of either of their countries. Sure, both pushed to penetrate into the countries, but there were still countries of rice, hot springs, and frost in between them, so there was enough buffer to prevent the hostilities to reach the Land of Fire and the Land of Lightning. And now, Kiri had a free ticket and the war would most likely start inside the Land of Lightning. Kumo was forced to forsake either Konoha or IWA front, and while Konoha was more hated by them, they quickly deduced that Konoha front was the better option since IWA was not really trying to invade the Land of Lightning except for some very rare skirmishes that are more often than not just a diversion for an attack on Konoha forces. Most of these battles were fought on the islands between the Land of Earth and Lightning anyway, so it was not really a threat. Konoha, on the other hand, had its hands full and won't be really able to retaliate even if Kumo dropped the front. Their decision was obvious. Hokage-sama, isn't that a good thing for us though? Hyuga clan head stood up and asked, making the Hokage briefly look at him with a tired gaze. No, not really, he said dryly. It was utterly vexing how the situation didn't change for Konoha despite the major change in Kumo. Nothing really changed. What many of you don't know is that there were some small skirmishes between samurai and Kiri ninjas in the cities near the shores. Despite the Kumo front being unofficially closed, the ceasefire was not signed, meaning we are now in a three-way battle rather than a two-way. Lucky for us that Kiri also started a war with Kumo rather than focus only on us. It's all the merit of our counterintelligence department that made it impossible to find out just how bad the situation on our side is. The Hokage side. Nevertheless, we now have to prepare for a war on our territory. Tsunade quipped, simplifying what Hokage wanted to convey. Not to mention that Nagori Isles might not be that close to Konoha's shores but are still closer than the land of water. I wonder if Mizukage or Hokage will realize that. Tsunade inwardly chuckled. Kiri now had the best possible outpost for bringing the war into the territories of both Land of Fire and Lightning. Something that didn't really happen since the first war. As she said that, many widened their eyes and the mood turned gloomy. No longer did they inwardly rejoice at having to fend off only IWA forces. Now they realized that the situation just got a whole lot worse.